Okay, I think we'll go ahead and get started. We might have some more people joining as we go. Um, but welcome to today's Rollins School of Public Health Alumni Panel, Pathways to Public Health, Mid-Career Alumni. I'm Sarah Manus, one of the moderators for today's session, and our second moderator is Amy Parker Feeblecorn, and we are both current members of the Rollins Alumni Board. We're fortunate to have three alumni representatives from Rollins School of Public Health with us today. And at Rollins, we are incredibly proud of the contributions our alumni make to public health. The purpose of today's session is to highlight the amazing career paths of three different alumni who are in the middle of their careers. We plan to cover topics such as making successful career transitions, taking on leadership positions within your organization, and professional development opportunities that help you advance in your career. Before I introduce our panelists, a couple housekeeping items. One, today's session will be recorded. If that is an issue, please feel free to drop now. For today's session, you may type any questions into the chat as we go along. After the panelists have finished their discussion, we'll open it up to the audience and ask the panelists questions that have been entered into the chat.
Great. So we'd like to introduce our first panelist, Carmen Daniel. Carmen has devoted her professional and personal work in public health to decreasing health inequities for families and communities. Currently a public health practitioner and researcher at RTI International, she has over 12 years experience in addressing health disparities, utilizing collective impact and quality improvement frameworks. A certified exercise physiologist, certified worksite wellness program manager, and behavioral scientist, Carmen is passionate about helping others meet their individual wellness goals through theoretical behavior change concepts around value systems and social networks. She aspires to use her experience and education to influence equitable health policy. Our second panelist is David Bain. David is a director of the Thurston County Public Health and Social Services Department in Washington State. He holds a bachelor's degree in political science from Berry College and a master's degree in public health from Emory. His previous role was serving as Deputy Secretary of Strategic Partnerships with the Washington State Department of Health. And our final panelist is Dr. Nomana Khan, a senior executive with over 20 years of cross-cutting public health and clinical experience. Nomana has successfully managed several high-impact projects, both at federal and state levels, and has served internationally for the United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees, UNHCR, for mission-driven humanitarian efforts. Currently a senior director for public health surveillance and data analytics at Maximus Inc., Nomana provides technical and SME support, health consultancy, and programmatic leadership, and she leads efforts to support public health surveillance systems capacity building, strengthening health information infrastructure, streamlining data ingestion, integration and exchange, workforce development, and data modernization. She also contributes to business development, solutions and services capture, and strategic planning to design, develop, and deliver innovative and impactful public health solutions. In addition to her leadership role in the domestic market, Nomana extends support for Maximus International public health projects.
Now we'll get started with our questions. Let's start with Carmen. Please tell us about your career journey since Rollins.
Sure. Well, good morning, good afternoon. Thanks so much for having me. I'm excited about this panel. I started Rollins while I was working for the Georgia Department of Public Health. So I was, quote unquote, beginning my public health career and knew that I needed more. I knew the skills that I lacked that I could not gain from experience alone. So at Rollins, I worked full time after graduating in 2017 in BSHE, Behavioral Science Health Education, I continued to work. I did get a promotion, so that was great. That came with advanced degree, but I learned so much in my time at Rollins that I could then apply that to the work that I was doing at the Department of Public Health. I transitioned from one program to another. So I was working in the worksite wellness space, working under human resources. I transitioned to children's health. So I then oversaw our Georgia's Childhood Obesity Initiative at the time. Thoroughly enjoyed that position through COVID. And then I transitioned again to RTI International, where I am today. So a couple of transitions during my journey in Rollins and then afterwards.
Thank you so much. We look forward to learning more. Now I'd like to ask David about your journey and how Rollins shaped your current career path.
Thanks, Sarah. Carmen's journey and mine intersect, which is really fun. So I started my career as a budget analyst for the Georgia Senate and worked for the Health Appropriations Committee. And that's how I was first introduced to public health as a department. And they stole me to become their legislative director. And it was my introduction to public health in a kind of real on the ground sense. And the bug got me. I decided after a couple years that I wanted to make it official that this was going to be my career, and was able to go to Emory and just really loved the process of combining what I'd already experienced for a couple of years with sort of this academic rigor and things that I was doing. I was like, oh, I can make sense of this more. Like I understand more and more of what we were trying to accomplish here in a more scientific or more academic way. And that was really, really helpful. Not to mention the networking and the connections that I made through Rollins. So that led me to being able to apply for, as Carmen said, even more advanced opportunities. So I had a chance to get a job in Washington State, running the public affairs department for Washington State Public Health. Made the cross country move back in 2018. Was there for, around 4.5 years as part of their executive team, and I ran their public affairs. And then I started a new office for partnerships within the department. And then last year, I had the privilege of being selected as the county health director here where I live. So it has been quite the run, but really appreciate both the connections and the friendships that I built through Rollins for sure.
Thank you so much. Finally, I'd like to hear from our third panelist, Nomana. How did Rollins shape your current career trajectory?
Thanks, Sarah, and hello, everyone. Before I actually address how it shaped, as probably in my introduction, it was introduced, I'm a medical professionalist. I did my residency, did my medical back in my home country, Pakistan. And I was right off the bat was interested in public health for a number of reasons, right? There was a huge need, not only in the country I was in, but also internationally. I was working at that point through UNHCR on many of the guidelines and protocols for CDC. So I was kind of very up to date on public health side of things. And then when I decided to actually pursue my career officially in public health, make it more formalized. Honestly, Emory was my first choice, and the reason was multiple-fold. As we all know, it's not only the best of the best training, but it also there's a huge support system that comes with it. And both of those was really helpful for me in my career. I wouldn't call it a change because, as I said, I was in public health, but then officially I learned the skill sets, the tools, the resources I needed, the support system I wanted, the friendships I made. And as we all know, public health is a relatively smaller world. So that's when I started. And then right across the road, internship within CDC was my first job. So that was a kickstart, and afterwards it's all we'll go into additional details, but that's where I started, and that's how the excellent courses and trainings we had in during our 2 years was a really good start for me as a public health professional.
Great. Thank you all. So you've all made changes throughout your careers, new roles, new organizations, or new sectors completely. And many alumni are navigating these mid-career transitions with the key question in mind. How do you go about making a successful career transition? So let's go back to you, Dr. Khan. How did you decide to shift gears from your work at CDC over to Maximus Public Health?
Thank you. I would start with the background of public health is a very broad field in terms of its scope, titles, and skill set that's needed to accomplish the job. And also, I feel like public health is very cross-functional. Many skills and experiences cross over. As I mentioned, my background is kind of very interesting. I started internationally and then CDC. I spent about 10 years in CDC. And at that point, I was working very closely with states and local health departments, programmatically, policy-wise, as well as providing support for them operationally. And at that point, I realized how significant it is to understand the health department perspective and its functions and services. So it's very interlinked, is what I'm trying to say. And actually, between CDC and Maximus, I work for state health department in New Hampshire. So that's where actually when I was within CDC and working with states, I felt like having an experience which is a public health state experience or a local health department experience is very important to get the perspective, that side of things, right? Because if we are trying to implement things without understanding the challenges and gaps at the grassroots level, it's really hard to have that connection. So that's when I started to get some state public health experience and actually moved to New England region. And with COVID, obviously things changed for all of us. I was serving as a director for the COVID response at that point, and that's where I got this offer from Maximus, which is a private company, but are direct operational and programmatic and technical solution providers to the states and federal, for that matter, CDC. So I would say this was very well aligned at that stage of my career when I was making the transition from federal to state and then to the corporate level.
Great. Thank you so much. And David, what would you say has been your biggest career transition, and how did you decide it was time to make that move?
Yeah, thanks. That's a good question. I feel like there's probably a tie between the two biggest transitions. I think the first was really going from working for the legislature and moving over to working for Department of Health in Georgia. And then the second was to transition from working from the state to the local level for public health. So that first jump from the legislature to the state, I had this sort of fork in the road of, do I want to pursue sort of government budget as the way I want to look at sort of health, or do I look at the policy side and working with more of the legislative angle versus sort of the budget and numbers, and decided I loved people more than I did spreadsheets. And that was sort of that first kind of kickoff for me. But, part of that was truly thinking about like, what were the things that brought me joy? What were the things that got me excited in the morning? And I realized in my role in the budget office, it was engaging with people. It was engaging on policy topics. I was good at what I did. I enjoyed being able to figure out creative ways to provide, budget solutions to problems. But it was that engagement with people and that idea of kind of having a high level look at policy that really got me excited and going. And so sort of fast forward to 5 years ago, when I had the opportunity to come to Washington State, I switched from being more of a legislative person to more of a communications, public affairs track, but I was still engaging with people at a high level and loved that. This choice to come to the local side had been kind of a dream of mine for a while. I have really enjoyed being in sort of executive level positions and being able to influence policy and programs from a 10,000 foot level. But I've missed being able to feel like I was impacting something locally and feeling I could touch and see what I was doing, if that makes sense. And so having the opportunity to work for the county I live in, where my kids live in, to see the impact of my job was just such a unique opportunity that I could not pass up. And so I think that was really what drove me to this one. Again, I was sort of thinking about where my biggest impact could be, what got me up in the morning feeling like I could do this job day to day. And those are really the driving factors for me in both of those transitions.
I love your perspective, how, you really took the time to think about like what does brighten my day, and where do I want to be at the end of all this? Do I want to be looking at spreadsheets or working with people? And I like, how you step back and really took the time to systematically think about some of those overarching big picture things as you're like making these decisions. Great information. So Carmen, like similar question as David, as you reflect on your different moves, what inspired these, or how did you know it was time?
No, as David mentioned, it is a really great question. I'm starting to reflect, when did these transitions actually start? And I would say, when my first public health job was actually in research, and I was a clinical research assistant in a town in West Virginia, in a small community clinic, and I did tobacco clinical research. And so I was essentially interviewing parents in the pediatric part of the clinic about their smoking habits. And I thought that I was going to be a researcher through and through, and this is what life would be like. I would say my transitions came from trial and error. And so as I was in that space, I knew that I did not want to spend my days asking questions and only being in that space of asking the questions. But what do we do after that? Are there interventions that we can implement? How are we helping these families? Though we are collecting information to field the field of science, how can we create some interventions around that? So after I left West Virginia in that clinical research space, I started looking for ways in which I could actually serve the community. As David mentioned, I wanted to be in the community. When I moved to Atlanta, the first thing I did was look up volunteer opportunities in the quote unquote public health space where I could go into the community and volunteer. And that's where I started. I then landed a volunteer opportunity working at the state health department. I knew that I did not want to have limited health topic knowledge. So at the time, I was core tobacco, but my background is physical activity. So when I started working at the state agency, there was a program, and that program was Worksite Wellness, and it was truly all chronic disease. I looked at it as the all-in, be-all. I can learn many different health topic areas. I can go through the true process of a public health intervention, from doing assessments and evaluating it and implementing and facilitating, and then evaluating again that PDCA, Plan, Do, Check, Act cycle of quality improvement. And I absolutely loved it. I learned so much, but I also got to collaborate across other programs within the agency because we were so central. And in that, I learned more about the inner workings and foundation of public health. So while I was there, I transitioned within that program, but then because of the knowledge and the skills that I gained, I wanted a different eye view of what I could do for citizens within Georgia. And so I was approached with the opportunity to lead our childhood obesity initiative, which was mostly external facing, but we had many partners internal to the agency as well. And so that transition came from, I always tell people, passion, right? I showed up every day. I loved the work, but I also inserted myself wherever I could within the agency, within the state health department. Fast forward to where I am now in more of a research space. You're like, Carmen, how did you get back in research? You said you did not like it. I realized while working at the state health department that there are, I thought, three main arms. There's the programmatic arm that we work on at the local level, boots on the ground, and you're implementing the program. But then there's that academic research arm that we have to ask the questions. We have to understand what people are doing, how are their behaviors impacting their health outcomes. But then there's that policy piece that really looks at population health and creates policies and laws that protect all. And so in order to kind of fill that triangle, so to speak, I knew that I then had to take all of the skills that I've acquired working on the ground, working in boots on the ground public health, and take that to an academic research space to bridge that gap when we talk about creating policies that impact and benefit all. So that is my, I guess, quick and dirty to those transitions and where I am now.
Thank you so much, Carmen. That's great to hear about kind of how you come full circle, it sounds, in figuring out like where your passions lie and where you can truly make an impact. Inevitably, life happens during your career that can lead to shifts in your trajectory. Nomana, you've had a fascinating trajectory. I hope you wouldn't mind telling us a little bit about what have been some of the decision points in your life and how that impacted your career path.
Thank you. Where to start? I have a long, there are so many decision points that some of them were intentional. Honestly, some of them just happened as a consequence of my one position. So I think CDC, let's start with CDC, right? So I had this national kind of a perspective of policies, management, protocols, kind of TA, technical assistance to the jurisdictions, state and local. And then when within CDC, I felt like there was a gap that I did not understand while I was extending this kind of support services to the state and local health departments. And so that's where I felt like there is a need for me to have some kind of an experience that is direct experience within state or local health department. So I think that was easier transition, but then finding a good programmatic area was something that took me a little bit of time. My area is information systems, surveillance, and processes and procedures, and data standards and data analytics and all those kind of fun stuff. So I really wanted something that is within that area, surveillance, programmatic aspect of things. So luckily, I got this job, which was in the state of New Hampshire, as I said. And that was an excellent experience in a relatively smaller size state with and I learned a lot about workforce training issues, and I'm sure David can, as a director, can speak to this for hours. But there are so many challenges at the smaller local or state level, and they're doing terrific job. Each person is like doing 5 person's job with the least of resources or whatever resources become available. So that was a really diversified kind of full of experience 2 years, and I learned the reality of how the data is collected, what challenges are in data collection, how systems operate, what are the challenges systems have, interoperability, standards, the gap between healthcare and public health. So that was really enlightening because I saw the other side of the picture, because at CDC we receive all this information which is de-identified and cumulative. And then, as I said, during COVID, there was a huge need of innovative solutions, right? We had to put something together real quickly. The systems were not working, or they were overburdened with all the information that never came in, as like thousands of reports in a day or sometimes in an hour. And then also the interoperability between systems, the hospital systems, the local health department feeding into the state health department. All those systems made me really interested, or the lack of the operational infrastructure or limitations I saw led me to like, where can I learn and be more engaged in the solution development? And that's where I started thinking about, a company that is engaged with the state health departments as well as with the federal agencies in terms of solution development for these kind of things. And obviously, I was lucky to have a position within Maximus, where I am basically as Amy explained, I'm working with the career growth opportunities, solutioning, pipeline development, working closely with our partners, with the potential partners, trying to understand their issues and challenges, and trying to help them in the areas they need support with as a partner, right? And I think my experience within CDC as well as with state is really beneficial for me to understand the same, the issues and problems and translate into a solution process that we have in this company.
Thank you so much for sharing that. David, what about you? How did you make the decision to move all the way across the country?
Yeah, right. That was quite the shift. I'll be honest, I got poached. I was at an ASTO conference actually in DC. And the chief of staff for the public health department in Washington, we were at this senior deputy meeting, and she saw my bio and pulled me aside and said, "Hey, I've got this job opportunity in Washington." And I thought she meant DC, and I was like, "All right, that's still far from Atlanta, but I'll entertain it." And she's like, "No, Washington State." And I did a kind of a double take of like, I'm in Atlanta, right? Like, I'm in Georgia. But Washington State's public health department has a great national reputation for being innovative, for being progressive in terms of how they're trying to achieve their policy aims, and the chance to work with a group of people. I think on that end of the spectrum was really exciting for me. And I think at the time I had a 1-year-old. I'd been 1 year out of my degree from Rollins and was ready for the next step. So in some ways, the timing was just sort of fortuitous, right? I just happened to be in a spot where I was ready for an opportunity, but it was a difficult decision. All my family is in Atlanta. My network was in Atlanta. I was in leadership at the Department of Health over in Georgia. So I had a good role. It wasn't because I was at a bad job. It just was thinking about where I wanted to head and where I wanted to be in the next couple of years. And so for me, I think that I kept thinking about basically my ceiling. Like, my ceiling expanded going to Washington State. It was going to stretch me. It was going to put me in positions that I wasn't going to be as familiar with. The role that I was moving into wasn't a role that was directly the role that I currently had. I'd gotten comfortable, honestly. Like, I knew my job really well in Georgia. I have been in it for years, had established a good framework, and I think I was ready to kind of push myself again. And so I think that the combination of being in a state that was so committed to public health, having a chance to really stretch my capacity, being able to put my degree into action, all those pieces of the puzzle just got me there. Not to mention, I love being near the Pacific Ocean and seeing some mountains didn't hurt either. But yeah, I think that was it. I think it was looking at my career and feeling like, if not now, when, in many ways. So yeah, that's how I got to Washington.
That's great. Thank you for sharing that. Shifting gears a little bit, Carmen, outside of your day job, can you tell us about how you chose to get involved in the different boards and councils you've been a part of?
Sure. That's the first thing that comes to mind is that after no longer working in state government, I felt as though I had more flexibility to do it, quite honestly. Outside of that bureaucratic space, I felt that I now could then share all of the knowledge and skills and experiences that I had and working in the state health department with the community in the way of being a part of boards and councils that are working and doing the work that we want them to do from a local state level, and that really truly make up what core public health is, in my opinion. So that one came from, I I could. I felt as though I had the autonomy to do that. Two, I felt as though my responsibility, being in service and wanting to be in service of others, was to then lend the skills of, it could be budget management, it could be gathering and sourcing volunteers, it could be creating a program from the ground up, evaluating that program, applying for grants and funding, all of those core skills that were developed not just in working, but also through my education at Rollins, and using that within those spaces and being a part of boards and councils that share the same mission, vision, and values that I do. So that's brief. I could go into more detail if you like, but in brief, that is why I chose to get involved.
Thank you. So great. Such great information so far. I'm going to shift gears because we've had some really interesting questions come in from the audience, and I just want to make sure that we take a moment to address those. So the first one is from Laura Martin. And she asks, how are folks making their career and transition choices considering the realities of paying student loans and the requirements of the PSLF program? And does this apply to any of you? And she said, thank you in advance. So that's the first one.
Yeah, I'll start. This has definitely been something in the back of my mind as I've made decisions. Back when I was deciding about coming over to Washington State from Georgia, I also had opportunities to go to the private sector as well, in more of a consulting pathway, still in public health, but on the consulting end. And that was definitely part of my sort of thought process, was contemplating the fact that if I'd stayed with the public sector, right, like it would enable me to continue to meet the requirements for PSLF. So it wasn't the only reason that I stayed in that pathway, but definitely was a motivating factor. Like, I think if I'm honest about that, it definitely, when I think about the benefits of being able to get some of my loans forgiven at a certain point because of that, it's very tempting, right? At that end, it makes looking for other opportunities, it has to really cross a certain threshold for me to want to sort of get out of the public space at that point. So yeah, I think it's realistic to keep that in mind. But I didn't want to be miserable either, right? Like, I didn't want to just sort of keep a public sector job just to keep my loans, in a certain pathway. I wanted to make sure whatever jobs I was going to do next needed to sort of fit what I was wanting, which is, again, to be stretched, to feel like I'm providing value. And so to find that combination was always key for me. But absolutely part of my decision making, for sure.
Very helpful. Do either of the other panelists want to address that?
I can add. I think I would primarily agree with David. For me, it was a good combination of, advantages and not being able to being eligible for the loan forgiveness program. But for me, at least, I think I had my own career path in mind first. I did serve for the state, but at that point, I didn't feel like, continuing with that in that trajectory probably would be the best opportunity for me. But I can always go back, So I think it's pretty personal, and for me it was just a balancing the benefits as well as the learning curve I wanted to go through, and how quickly I wanted to get to a certain position or a point in my career.
Thanks.
And just to add to David and Amana, yes, 100%. It is a reality of mine, and it's something that I took in consideration. I do think, to David's point, you don't ever want to be in a space where you're unhappy for the sake of paying student loans, because there are many opportunities out there In transitioning from a state health department to RTI, I was not aware that they are part of PSLF. And it was icing on the cake that they were. And so oftentimes I think we have in our mind the box in which organizations fit in that are applicable to public student loan forgiveness. And so opening that up and maybe asking those questions up front as you're marketing and looking for other jobs. And so I would say two things. Keep it in mind if that is important to you, because we have to live fulfilled lives, but then don't limit yourself, because who knows, that organization may fall within the parameters to for you to be able to still be a part of the PSLF program.
Great advice. Thanks. And if you all wouldn't mind just addressing the second question, just so that we can make sure we don't run out of time for that. But and this is from the Elias family, can any of the panelists or audience describe success stories of people who left public health, for example, for pharma, and then later returned? So they're looking for pointers or training that has enabled people to transition back to public health. And, because you asked like for panelists or audience experience, and I think this is like where your networking really comes in, make sure you're going to conferences and talking with folks. So if you've left, one sector and you've moved to an entirely different area, so many of these skills are transferable, and it's just a matter of finding openings. And it doesn't really matter if it's in government or in the private sector, but epidemiology is epidemiology, or policy is still policy. And it's really more of a matter of knowing like when those openings for different positions come up, and, talking with the right people and being at the right place at the right time.
Yeah, I was going to add that the one thing that I've always enjoyed seeing is my network on LinkedIn. So those that I've worked with or met at conferences, and seeing in real time their transitions to and from public health. I think that has been enlightening. So definitely, as Amy mentioned, utilizing the networks that you've created. I think LinkedIn is it's a tangible space to look at those transitions that people have made. But Laura Martin in the comments mentioned how you market yourself. And it's so, that's so true. The one thing that I look at with public health and our skills, I feel like we can do everything. If you have a master's in public health, you can go to any sector, you can go to any organization, and you could run that organization, because those are the skills that we're equipped with. So the language that you use, how you market yourself, speaking to others that are currently in the space. And I tell people all the time that are looking for work, no one knows you're looking unless you tell them. So scream it out the top of the mountains that is something that you're interested in. So as people are in spaces where their opportunities exist, they know to mention that you are interested, or to share your information.
That's a really good point. Another pointer that I would share is try to explore the position descriptions are sometimes so confusing, right? So I would explore, depending on which area of public health you want to come back to, or you had experience in, or what your interests are in, I would explore a lot of position descriptions and see where you fit or your interests lie. And you'd be surprised that there can be so many intersections of, as an example for you, pharma. I had a friend who transitioned from healthcare management. Actually, she was a business person into public health, core public health, EPI. And she just found a position that was within marketing, within business development, but still public health. So I would say, reach out, as people were saying, to folks who have been in the field, and you might find somebody who has already made that kind of a transition, and having a conversation of what's the best intersection, the transition point looks like with the. And then you obviously have training, while you are working or on the job, depending on which area you are interested in. So that would be another hopefully helpful pointer.
Great advice. Thank you. So when changing job positions, you've moved to similar roles. Some of you have changed sectors completely. Nomana, when you've transitioned, what skills did you find valuable to take with you from when you moved from government over to a private sector, the company?
See if I am. Yes, I'm on mute. Sorry, I wasn't sure if I'm mute. So, in terms of that skill set, I think the core skill sets are the same. And as Carmen was mentioning, with MPH, basically you have a good sense of those skill sets. The EPI, the data analytics, the research skills we have. I also think having a good understanding of policy and management principles. And since my track was health policy and management, I felt like that was pretty helpful. Obviously, EPI, biostat, and communication were all great areas. Health communication is something that we always recognized as a very core important area of public health, but I think we all have learned through COVID how important communication and or the lack of it can be important to the success or otherwise for a program. So these are the core areas. I think the additional skill set or a more valuable skill set for me in private sector have been the technology and healthcare informatics and innovation and advanced analytics, right? Data mining, machine learning, AI, just a familiarity would still be good. But I think what I would like to emphasize is that willingness to learn, grow, and improve is most important. It has been most valuable for me. As we know, public health ecosystem is continuously changing, and it should change, and we expect it to change. And with the technology and innovation we are seeing, we all know it would be changing in a much faster pace. So I think having this core capabilities through a Masters of Public Health program and some areas of what we all have, continuously kind of having trainings, upskilling your areas of interest is where I would go. That's what I have followed in my professional career.
Very good. It's really that growth mindset and having the confidence to learn new skills and recognizing that that's how we continue to grow. Thank you. So Carmen, a similar question. What skills did you bring with you from working at the Georgia Department of Health that also applied to your work at RTI?
Thank you. And thinking about growth mindset, I looked for companies like RTI because I knew that and working at the health department, a lot of my work revolved around programs. So implementing, facilitating, high level evaluation. Oftentimes we partnered with academic institutions for evaluation. So we were typically on the implementation side. And so thinking ahead, I knew that I wanted to go back to school, as we all do, but I wanted to get a PhD. And so with that, I knew that I had to increase opportunities in research, particularly around quantitative and qualitative research. So in transitioning, I knew that there's skills that I didn't have. I knew that for a fact. I knew that I did this in school. I did it at a very high level. I've worked with our academic partners through some of the processes. but I needed to sit down and dive into these core skills necessary to be an effective research mixed methodologist. So all that to say is when I first got to RTI, one of the first questions they asked me as an employee was, what's your superpower? That's how they do some of their performance. And I had to sit down and think about it. What is my superpower? What do I bring to RTI that is unique to me? And so as I started working on different projects and on different teams, I started to notate what my superpowers were that I gained at working at a health department. And I realized that they were, one, working with community-based organizations. So having the experience of working with people and working in communities and how that impacted how we did our research, how we developed our protocols, and how we developed our processes to implement the projects that we're working on, the evaluation projects that we're working on. So having that on the ground experience in public health, understanding how things work outside of theoretical models, knowing that these are real people doing real work every day, and being able to integrate that into the work that we do, translated into me being the conclusions, limitations, and recommendations expert in every report. And so coming into that, I didn't realize that was, my superpower, but being able to translate the outcomes from an evaluation and being able to put that into, I don't know, maybe a prioritization matrix for the client so that they knew exactly what their next steps were based on their resources and capabilities was a skill that I never wrote down. I never saw that as my superpower. So I say that to say, sometimes you do the work every day and you're not certain that these are skills that you bring to new jobs. And sometimes it does take sitting down and looking at the big picture, writing it down, understanding what you bring to an organization based on the experiences that you have, and really starting on the ground at the foundation and not overlooking those things. So I apply it every day to RTI. I now realize, what those superpowers or what those skills are. And so I always then recommend people to, if you can, work on the ground, work in public health where you can see the work being done and you can apply that in other settings.
Such great advice. Thank you, Carmen. And David, shifting over to you, in your experience working in health departments across the country, what did you find similar and different?
Yeah, I mean, I can probably write a whole thesis on this, right? And in terms of sort of the regionalization of public health and what that looks like across the country. But I would say, interestingly enough, sort of similar to what the other two panelists have talked about a little bit. There's a need across the country for folks to be able to communicate well with the public and public health. I think if there are many lessons learned from COVID. One of them was, I think, honestly, like how inadequate we really have been when it comes to communication with the public and our ability to enhance and increase folks' health literacy, our ability to communicate behavior change. I think there was a lot of successes in COVID, but there's plenty of gaps that I think we saw, whether you were in Georgia or in Washington, two very different states, right, politically, but we experienced similar tensions and problems, which says to me we've got sort of a universal set of problems, right? And so I think for me, that despite whatever state or county I'm in, success has always been linked to how well we communicate with the public and how well we communicate with governing authorities. This is a really big piece of this puzzle, right? Whether it's your county commissioners or state legislators or federal Congress folks, like our ability to communicate with them, what our needs are, what our successes are, is so important. And I think that at public health, I also argue we have a humility problem in some ways that we put our heads down, we do the work, we get it done. And I think what I've noticed, again, across the country is the need for us to advertise what it is we are doing in public health and how it's helping shape people's health at the end of the day. So I think that's similarity. Differences, I mean, this is going to seem obvious, but it's real, right? It's the political environment, right? I think that political environment shapes so much of what a health department is able to do and what it's willing to do at the end of the day. And so I think I'm so grateful to have worked in completely different political environments, and trying to achieve similar goals, and being able to sort of almost play this game of how do we reduce obesity? How do we cut down on underage smoking in two very different climates? And that skill set, being able to transition between those two, I think was really useful for me. And I think it's useful for anybody who's thinking about transition. Those skill sets are valuable across the board.
Thank you, David. This next question is for any of the three of you. When making decisions for your mid-career changes, who did you turn to for advice, and how did you determine who to talk to?
I can start. I think we have covered quite a bit of it, like, having I think having a good research, and having like a good thinking through your own capabilities, skill set, vision, and direction, as Carmen was mentioning, is hugely important and valuable, right? With that, obviously, what the job market, the positions out there, with your own decision, right? Your personal, your family decisions, your other factors, the outside professional factors also play an important role. Networking, as we have discussed, has been always great for me. Going to the forums and conferences, having conversations, being open to ideas and opportunities. Sometimes I never planned my career like this, right? So it just came one after another. So I think being open, keeping your vision in your mind, and willingness to change as things go is very important. But your colleagues, your people you work with, your obviously professional friends, the forums like conferences, LinkedIn, all those things have been great resources for me. And for me, my previous supervisors have been a great source of wonderful advice from me, because they know your skill set, they know your gaps in your skill set, right? So I think they see a side of you that sometimes you know, in your best of optimism, do not see. And I think having those kind of feedbacks, which sometimes are a little, push you to grow further, are also important in a realistic evaluation of your next steps. Thank you.
I'll jump in really quick and echo what Dr. Khan said. I think if you've got any type of mentor in the workplace, for me, I had a few at the Georgia Department of Health who really gave me honest feedback, knowing kind of my career path, knowing my ups and my downs. And as I'm presenting these options, them being able to say, oh yeah, this makes sense, or this job is awesome. This is something where, if you get this job, you have to really push on this thing, right? Or really expand your training in that thing. But that kind of honest sort of feedback is really helpful. I think Carmen mentioned this a while ago, but just again, going back to your network, whatever you're using for networking, whether it's a tool like LinkedIn or it's your more informal in-person network, I reach out to people constantly. If I was looking at a job in a particular sector or in a particular county even, and say, hey, what's the environment like? What am I walking into if I take this role? If I transition from Georgia to Washington State, I had a lot of conversation with folks about what that would be like. What am I looking into? And so I think I think cast a wider net than you think you need to when it comes to getting advice.
And I have just one more thing to add before we go to the next question is, you'd be surprised at how many Emory alum there are. There's so many. And so whether they're from Rollins or they're from another school, or maybe they went to their undergraduate to get their undergraduate degree, when I've looked on LinkedIn and I've seen organizations that are hiring for a job that I'm interested in, and I see that there are alum that are currently working there, I reach out, and there has been 0 times where they did not respond, just based on having the network of Emory alone. So don't be afraid to ask strangers either, because they can offer pretty honest advice. They have nothing to lose. And so to David and Amani's point, using all of the resources that are available to you, and specifically for me, I did that, but I also reached out to mentors that I had at work, and in them providing feedback, create a space where you're able to take that constructive criticism and move forward so that you can be the best that you can be as you're looking forward to additional opportunities. And if you can create that space in the beginning where you're asking for critical feedback, then, folks are typically more likely to willingly give you that so that you continue to work on the gaps that you may have.
Great, thank you. So just to wrap this up, and you just offered some great advice, Carmen. Do either of the rest of you panelists have advice that you want to share for our alumni who are interested in making a mid-career transition?
Yeah, I'll jump in really quick. Don't let fear be the driving force for not making the transition. I mean, don't let the dauntingness feeling of like, okay, the unknown, I think, stop you from contemplating that next move. That sounds really maybe self-evident, but I think it's really easy to get comfortable in a career, which is fine, right? But if you're interested in expanding your horizon, stretching yourself, it's going to come with a little bit of a fear factor. I think it's okay. I think embracing that and knowing that that's part of it, I think is really key. It's leaning into that and recognizing that this sounds very cliched, but like that greatness that you want to achieve is only going to come if you can push past that kind of fear. And so that's something that I would just posit is be willing to make that leap.
And I would just add, just with the fear and then also the comfort of where you are. And that's where I was. I was very comfortable in my family home at the health department in Georgia. I was there for nearly 10 years. And I cried on my last day. It was emotional. And I think if we can embrace that and know that it's still okay, and you can have those emotions and you can be a bit afraid and you can feel uncomfortable, but those things are necessary for change. And that is a big change when you're transitioning your career, especially when there are so many more people that are impacted by it than just yourself. So I just wanted to share that it can be an emotional transition, but that's okay. And it's normal. And if you are feeling that as you're going through it, to not let that deter you from continuing to move forward.
Great points. I would agree absolutely with David and Carmen. Willingness to change, openness to change, and having those growth pains as we transition from one sector or one position to another. And I think we all have said this, and I want to close this out with one last advice from my end is just ask for help. Just reach out. As we were saying, I have never had in my life any opportunity when I needed help and I reached out and people were not willing to support or help, to the capacity they can. Sometimes just a single advice, which is very short, one-line advice leads you to a point in a direction that ends up being the answer to your own question. So reach out, ask good questions, do your research, and then, be willing to make a change. And sometimes it takes a little more courage than we think, but it's all worth it.
Thank you so much to our panelists and to all for joining. That concludes our panel discussion for today.